to start NFL Live out the gate with some breaking news. The Steelers are sending George Pickens to the Cowboys for a third-round pick next year and pick swap. So the Cowboys in search of a wide receiver in the draft. They get their number 2 alongside CeeDee Lamb, and they bring in Pickens as he enters the final year of his contract. Adam Schefter going to be standing by and joining us in minutes to give us other details. Oh, and with that, look who's feeling really good in May. Oh, he got some cobwebs on that jersey. It took him a while to bring it out of the closet, but Marcus Spears is feeling good and feeling happy. Am I just speaking for you, or are you going to just jump in with that smile and tell me how you feel about this trade?
Kev, I'm ecstatic, all right? People got to realize, all right, I'm not looking at the future. I'm not looking at the past. I'm looking at today. And I've been asking for 6 years for us to make a trade that I think is going to affect the team in a positive way. This is going to affect the team in a positive way. People trying to rain on my parade, telling me, oh, it's George Pickens, you got to see what he going to do. I don't care. On today, I'm happy we traded for a receiver that can play the position at a high level. We'll deal with all that later. Maybe I cry, maybe I laugh.
Hey, look, Marcus, look, man, you know, that's what's so great about the offseason. That's why the NFL is a 12-month-a-year proposition, right? Because even now, with no games being played, you feel like you've won. You feel like you've won. Cowboy Nation feels like they've won. And you know what? On paper, man, this is a real good look. It is. It makes sense. If you just look at this totally from a team-building standpoint on the field, this makes total sense. Big, outside lane wide receiver who can make highlight reel contested catches down the field outside the numbers. Go along with CD, who's a three tool player. You know, a healthy Dak Prescott, Jaden Blue, Miles Sanders, Javonte Williams. You got a lot of things going for you. Right up until you start playing games and maybe things start going sideways. Right up until that point. But you know
leave it at that.
Hey, you gotta shoot your shot. Exactly. You got to shoot your shot, ride the wave right now, go get your Cowboys gear, put your Cowboys jersey on, and just ride it. Let you live, Marcus. I'm going to let you live today.
Well, Lewis, no. I do want to get your thoughts on that last comment, right? You're the best hype man for Marcus in the offseason. Why will it change in the regular season? Why will that jersey go back in the closet?
Don't do that.
Why?
Don't do that, Kel. Don't do that.
Well, you know what?
Don't do that to me, y'all.
There's no telling. The question is this, though. Here's the thing in all seriousness, and I know we're going to have a lot of fun with this over the next couple of months. But the question is this. Look, everyone on the outside of the Cowboys organization, Brian Schottenheimer, the new head coach, inside the organization has talked about the fact that it's about culture, and we know that it is. We know that it's about some kind of relative harmony within a locker room where everyone's kind of rowing in the same direction. Can they get George to do those kinds of things that clearly Pittsburgh said, you know what, it's too big of a risk for us to go ahead and commit to him and DK Metcalf, given what we know about the young man and how he rose in the same direction, or rather his challenges as far as being able to row in the same direction as the rest of the organization here in Pittsburgh. Can Dallas get that out of him? We'll see.
I promise. We're going to get to Graz in a second to get his thoughts. Let's bring in Adam Schefter, our NFL insider. Schefter, how did this deal come together? What other details do you have about the Steelers and the Cowboys making this trade?
Well, Kevin, these two sides have been in contact. We've heard Jerry Jones talking about the fact that a trade was possible. And finally, they were able to put the pieces in place last night. Now, here are a couple of things to consider. The Dallas Cowboys obviously wanted to upgrade their wide receiver position. They have acquired a receiver in the eyes of people in the Steelers organization who is as talented as any wide receiver in the league, bar none. That is how good and how talented George Pickens is and can be. The flip side to that is that he was entering the last year of his contract, and there was not a team in the league more desperate to upgrade their wide receivers over the last couple of years than the Pittsburgh Steelers. And a team as desperate as the Steelers were to upgrade their wide receivers still saw fit to trade George Pickens today in a pick swap, essentially acquiring a third-round pick in return for his services when he is unquestionably as talented as any receiver in the league, but also is headed into the last year of his contract.
Garage, jump in.
You look at like the Cowboys and the players they like to acquire when they go out in free agency or make trades. George Pickens, 24 years old. So if there are any issues that follow him from Pittsburgh, you have the ability to say to yourself, well, he's 24 years old. There's time to grow. There's time to change, get better at the things he needs to work on. It's a one-year commitment, as Adam says. But the Cowboys, we're talking to a lot of different teams about different wide receivers before the draft. The draft happens. They don't really get one. I think if Teteroa McMillan had been there at number 12, then the Cowboys may have taken him, and this trade may never happen. But once they come out of the draft without a receiver, the talks pick back up. They're willing to pay a little bit more, go up to a third-round pick for George Pickens, and they get him for 1 year, and they'll see. If they extend him, I think that would be a surprise at this point. But it doesn't mean he can't be there long term if he shows up and produces for them the way they hope he does this coming season.
Since trading Amari Cooper, they've been looking for a number 2 to join CeeDee Lamb, because when you look at the numbers, every defense knows cover 88, and still CeeDee Lamb has been fantastic over the last 2 years. How about over 2,000 more receiving yards than the next closest Dallas wideout in Brandon Cooks? That was the largest difference between a team's top 2 receivers in the league. Look at that gap disparity. And Marcus, let's bring it back here in the conversation. You're smiling because how does this change the offense for Brian Schottenheimer and Dak Prescott to have these 2 guys on the outside?
All right, Kev, I got my celebration out the way. One, everything that Lou, Schefter, and Graz said is important. The culture is going to matter. Yeah. And the culture is the players he's playing with. But on the field, it takes pressure off. Like, we've talked about this number 2 ad nauseum for the Dallas Cowboys, and they've been trying to fill in gaps and fill in roles and all of that stuff. I thought Michael Gallup back in a few years ago was trending towards being that guy. But what it does is it opens up this offense. Brian Schottenheimer talked about when he got the job that he wanted to become a more shifts in motion. He wanted to kind of innovate this offense a little bit and update it. And what you see now, especially look no further than your Philadelphia Eagles, Kev, when you have 2 real threats that are on the field, it makes defenses play you differently. And you win before the actual snap. So that's what I'm thinking. The excitement comes from that. Matchup problems. Who do we leave one-on-one when we double CeeDee Lamb? We have a guy that we know can win on the outside. Everything revolving around this George Pickens trade is about his availability, and is he going to bring a maturity that's needed in order to stay on the field and be available for games. If he does that, this offense is going to be a problem with those 2 guys on the outside.
Yeah, look, I remember Devontae Adams one time. I asked him the question. I said, what really defines a true number 1 wide receiver in your mind? Because we all have subjective opinions about what does that look like. And so quite honestly, George has exactly the characteristic that Devontae had told me at that time, which is a guy who can line up outside the numbers where the boundary is right there. So he doesn't have the whole middle of the field to work with. He is literally confined to a tight space. He's going to be faced with man coverage. And this guy can just win in a contested environment time after time after time. That's what he can do. It's just one-on-one. Whether he's covered or not, you can throw the football to him and he can make the play. George can do that. That's why people talk about George the way in which they do, which is he's as talented as any wide receiver in the NFL. That has never been a question about George Pickens. His talent has never been a question. For you, though, to feel as though it isn't worth the risk, or rather the risk is too great for you to wind up extending this young man, whether or not you have DK Metcalf or not. This was a guy who was homegrown. Okay, he was picked by the Steelers. Right. Mike Tomlin was mentoring him. For him to go ahead and move on from him at this point in time raises a red flag. It just does. But his talent is unquestioned, and that's exactly what Dallas was looking for.
And there's some historical context to this. Like, Dallas hasn't been shy of bringing in receivers that have baggage, stuff that comes along with them. Brought in T.O. while I was there, and T.O. performed phenomenally. Dez Bryant in the draft. They brought guys that have been very, very good and have done phenomenal things. And I think this is something that, quite frankly, Jerry Jones personally takes on as a task to get these type of guys to the level in which people think they can play. So I don't think it's that far-fetched that this move is made by Dallas. There's some historical reference to that specific position and the guys that they've decided to take shots on with uber talent.
When you talk to people who have coached George Pickens in Pittsburgh, they'll tell you the great stuff is really great, game-winning level great. The negative is sort of game-losing level negative, right? He won't run a route correctly, or he'll just kind of space out. Again, just 24. I will point out, and Dallas would point this out, this will be the best quarterback he's ever played with. The best, probably the best leader at the quarterback position that he's ever played with. And the structure around him, with CeeDee Lamb there as the clear number one, I think they feel like is going to be good in terms of getting the absolute best out of George Pickens, which, as you guys point out, can be exceptional.
And to add to all of this, he is motivated. He has 1 year left on his contract. That plays a huge conversation here as we continue to talk about the offseason for the Cowboys. Let's bring Schefter back here. Let's talk about the quarterback here. We saw Dak Prescott's season come to a quick end in the fall due to a hamstring injury that required surgery. What are the expectations for Dak, a healthy Dak, at the start of the season?
Well, Kevin, he's okay, and he's going to be okay for the start of the season without question. I think if the Dallas Cowboys had a game coming up at the start of training camp, he would be ready for it, undoubtedly. He's healed from that injury. He is where they want him to be, and they are moving in a direction that makes them think that he will be ready to start training camp and to start the season. So that's good news for the Dallas Cowboys. Dak can begin working that chemistry with George Pickens, Javonte Williams, and the new members of this new-look Dallas offense.
Okay, I mentioned contract, and when you talk about contracts and that final year, it hangs over the Cowboys. What's the status of a new deal for Micah Parsons now in Big D?
Well, what's interesting here, as it pertains to today, is that Micah Parsons is represented by David Mulgeta. And we heard Jerry Jones at the league meeting in March and April talk about the fact that he didn't know who Micah Parsons' agent was, despite the fact that David Mulgeta is one of the most prominent agents in the National Football League and maybe sports. But David Mulgeta represents Micah Parsons and George Pickens. So if Jerry Jones didn't know his name before, he's certainly going to know it now, because he represents two priority free agents for the Dallas Cowboys. And the Cowboys have been talking to Micah Parsons, and both sides want to try to move forward to get a deal done. And the expectation and belief continues to be that they will get a deal done, but no deal as of yet, Kevin.
Schefter, good context. We're going to come back and talk about the Steelers in a moment, but I do want to address this one thing now. Marcus, the dust has settled a little bit. You feel really good about this trade. But when you look at the division, the NFC East, the NFC Championship game featured the Eagles and the Commanders.
Yep.
How close are the Cowboys now to being a playoff contender after this trade in your mind?
They have more firepower to be a playoff contender. I think they really can be. I think defensively is where I'll be looking at the Dallas Cowboys more than anything. I think the offense will be fine with Dak leading the way and CeeDee, and they have some explosive guys. Obviously, add George Pickens makes them a tougher guard. So defensively, I think this team, if they come along, they can be a playoff football team. Kev, I'm not going to start talking about NFC East Championship or NFC Championship. I'm not getting into that. I never do. But what I do know is you have to have the requisite talent to position yourself to be in those conversations. And I think this George Pickens trade puts them a long way further than they were before it happened.
Okay, you said something really that stood out in that statement. Talent. What the Cowboys did was add talent. Now let's go to the Pittsburgh side. An offense that desperately needs talent. And I've heard all you guys talk about it. We all know about George Pickens and how talented he is. How do we feel about the Steelers that desperately needs talent on offense, and they're okay letting George Pickens go for a third-round pick for an asset that's not going to help this year's team? Marcus, how do we feel about the Steelers now?
I mean, TBD, unknown, marked insufficient. They don't. It's when the teacher don't even give you a grade. I don't know what the hell the Pittsburgh Steelers are doing, to be honest with you. Obviously, this George Pickens deal was more than football, and they felt like he outwore his welcome. But the question will always revert back to the quarterback position. And there is optimism amongst people. It ain't none amongst me. Mason Rudolph ain't winning you nothing. So you got to make a decision if you Pittsburgh, right? You've been in this state of constant trying to find a quarterback for a long time. How do you do that? It's either going to have to be free agency or trade, or you're going to have to be bad enough to draft high.
Yeah, and plain and simple, and we're going to address this as NFL Live's just getting started. Why would Aaron Rodgers want to come to this team when you look at the offense right now? See George Pickens on social putting up the new profile pic and smiling pretty big in that Cowboys white and blue. And let's bring in now Sam Acho alongside Louis Riddick as we continue to cover this breaking news here on NFL Live. Hey, Pickens led the Steelers in receiving yards in each of the last 2 seasons, and he was fantastic when he was on the field and getting good looks. Let's take a look at his top 3 plays during his time in Pittsburgh. And here we go, Sam. You ready? Louis, you ready? Let's go. Week 16, 2023. Bengals, Steelers, and we've got Mason Rudolph dropping back, now back in Pittsburgh. 3rd and long, finding Pickens holding it down.
You talked about it. You said when he gets good looks, George Pickens doesn't even need good looks. Sideline catches, supreme focus and concentration. Just put it in his vicinity, and George Pickens, when focused, is going to come down with it. And so it's how acrobatic he is and the sideline efficiency.
Okay, let's go to last year, Week 10. Steelers and Commanders. Now he's going to face this team twice in the division. Russell Wilson now throwing the moon ball in the back corner of the end zone. And Pickens, again, adjusting Lewis and finding a way.
This is what I'm talking about, these outside the number plays. Look, he looks covered right here, all right? And the ball isn't really exactly, he has to turn back to his inside, get his body parallel to the ground, and then survive the ground and secure the football and come up with the catch and complete the catch. That's what we're talking about when we're saying that this young man has true number 1 talent, because he's never really covered because of the fact that he has unique ball tracking skills. And it doesn't matter if the sideline is working against him. He still finds a way to get the ball inbounds, secure the catch, and just make big play after big play.
A reminder, he's only 24. His rookie season against the Browns. Let's go to number 1 here. And I want you to also notice, guys, this is 3 highlights in 3 years and 3 different quarterbacks. This time, Mitch Trubisky rolling right. And Sam, he finds Pickens, and my goodness.
And this is George Pickens' rookie year. You talk about it, contested, clinic real, acrobatic. That's Odell Beckham in a nutshell. That's on the sideline as a rookie, one-handed. There's no space. So when you watch this player, George Pickens, play, that's what you see. At least that's what jumps out, the good side on tape.
All right. Since the start of the 2023 season, Pickens is the only player in the league to average at least 16 yards per reception and gain 2,000 receiving yards. If you've caught a theme here in the first 24 minutes of NFL Live, from everybody that has talked about George Pickens, he is supremely talented. Supremely talented. So why did he get traded for a 3rd-round pick, and why a team like the Steelers are moving on? Let's bring in our Steelers reporter, Brooke Pryor, who covers this team. So, again, we talk about the talent, 1st-round talent, but he didn't go in the 1st round 3 years ago. And this Steelers team needs talent on the offensive side. So why were they willing to move on from him now?
Well, Kevin, it's simple. He was creating more headaches for his own team than he was creating for opposing defenses. I think Lewis hit the nail on the head earlier that when Mike Tomlin is ready to move on from you, there's a lot of red flags for you as a player. And with George Pickens, we saw those in the form of his sideline demonstrations, throwing the helmet, yelling at teammates, some of his celebrations on the field, getting flagged for unsportsmanlike penalties, celebrating a big catch. All of those things created a bigger headache than the big-time plays that he was also making. And look, the Steelers have a history of making these cost-benefit analyses and deciding that some of these really supremely talented wide receivers are not worth the headache. Let's look at their recent history of guys they've traded away. Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, Antonio Brown, Martavis Bryant, and now George Pickens. There's a common denominator there. It's not the talent, it's everything else that made the Steelers say, okay, he could be coming up for a contract extension this summer. Things could get messy with the potential holdout, hold in. It's better to move on now. We've got DK Metcalf. We're paying him big money. Let's get what we can out of George Pickens, ship him to Dallas, get a return on that, and move forward as an organization.
Yeah, they made that offseason trade with the Seahawks before the draft, sending a second-round pick and then giving Metcalf that extension. So you have a true number one, no doubt about it. It's just what happens afterwards. What's the general feeling in the building right now after this move?
Kevin, it's relief. And I think that's because this is a team that knew a move like this could happen. They had discussed the potential for a George Pickens trade prior to the draft. They were listening to calls, obviously tabled it during the draft, and then it came together last night and was finalized this morning. This is an organization that knows how talented George Pickens is, but that calculus changed, and they are not panicking because they've just lost a top wide receiver. That's kind of been their MO all offseason, that while there seems to be a lot of panic about the Steelers from outside the organization, that's not the feeling inside the building, and that even extends to Aaron Rodgers, who, as we know, has yet to make a decision. But in conversations I've had with people in the building, they still feel confident that he's eventually going to land in Pittsburgh. And Pickens, whether he's there or obviously now not there, doesn't change their calculus. I have to imagine that he has been informed of that this could be a potential, and he knew that as he continued to have these discussions with the Steelers.
And Brooke saying one word that you hang for Steelers fans: eventually. We will see how long that plays out before Aaron Rodgers makes his decision. Brooke Pryor, thank you so much. George Pickens has been acquired by the Dallas Cowboys in a trade with the Steelers for a third-round pick as well as a pick swap. The defending champs, by the way, that is those Eagles, have 2 games against the Cowboys, who have the 5th hardest schedule in the NFL this season. 10 games on the Cowboys schedule are against teams that made the playoffs last season. Outside the division, they'll play the NFC North and AFC West, including a home game against the Chiefs and on the road in Detroit. Let's bring in Sam Acho. So the Cowboys, they finished 3rd in this division this past year. They watched the top 2 teams face off in the NFC Championship game. Looking at their opponents this year, what's your biggest concern facing the Cowboys this season?
The fact that they got to go and play the Chiefs and the Chargers. Those are 2 of my biggest concerns. And add to that, the Lions and the Vikings and the Bears. Oh, my. You're playing the divisions that have some of the best teams in the NFL. And so the fact that Kansas City is on your schedule, that's a game that you know you're going to have to, it's going to be a challenge, going to be a struggle. The Chargers with Justin Herbert, Jim Harbaugh, you know that they're finding their identity this season, a tough-nosed football team. So I think those teams, along with the Lions and the Vikings, will be extremely challenging, as well as the Eagles twice a year for the Cowboys.
Yeah, Cowboys, by the way, 2-7 at home last season, 3rd worst home record in the NFL, something you don't see, of course, down in Fort Worth for them going and losing those games. As for the Steelers, they have the 10th hardest schedule this season based on their opponent's record in 2024. They play the entire AFC East and NFC North, including home games against the Bills, Packers, and Vikings. Let's bring back Louis Riddick here. So the Steelers, they finished 3rd in their division last year. Do you see any path where they're better than the 3rd best team in the AFC North, featuring the Ravens, the Bengals, and the Browns?
Not again, Kev, we talked about it earlier. Not as they're presently constructed, especially with the situation at quarterback. Look, they can't go blow for blow with the Ravens right now. They just can't. They're not going to be able to go blow for blow with the Bengals, assuming that defensively Al Golden is able to get that defense back on track, because Burrow will have it on track, as far as the offense is concerned. And look, man, Cleveland has improved their football team. Cleveland has a better quarterback situation. So you're looking at maybe they're fighting Cleveland to stay out of the cellar. And then when you look at they're going to play the AFC East and the NFC North, those are 2 pretty tough divisions, especially at the very top of the East and throughout the North in the NFC. Pittsburgh's up against it, man. This could be one of those seasons where we're sitting back and going, how the heck did this happen?
Yeah, and they got the Chargers and Seahawks and Colts on the schedule. Keep in mind here, 1988. 1988 is the last time the Steelers finished in last place in their division.